Hello again, and welcome back to another episode of Minds on Guard, where we're learning how to guard our minds against the continual manipulations, attacks, and various attempts at thought and behavior control that we come under today in the 21st century. Tonight, I want to expand a bit on the content of the previous video that I released, which dealt with the effects that scrolling on screens has on our ability to form memories. I see that there is a direct line to be drawn from the way social media apps and how people engage on those platforms to the 24-hour mainstream media news cycle. Just as we've discussed the harms of endless scrolling on social media, namely how it fractures our attention, weakens our working memory, and conditions us to chase dopamine hits, the nonstop news cycle operates on similar psychological mechanisms. The problem is not just the content of the news itself, far from it actually, but the way that it's actually packaged, timed, and then fed to us, creating an environment where our minds are constantly overstimulated, fragmented, and ultimately left unable to recall or process events meaningfully. In this video, we're going to break this down into 3 sections. How rapid-fire information dumps fracture our attention and distort memory encoding, how this leads to shallow processing of events, dopamine addiction, and the search for narcissistic supply through pre-programmed echo chambers and ideological camps, and then finally how these predictable cognitive effects are exploited by large-scale agendas to keep populations compliant and even desirous of their own enslavement. By the end of this video, my hope is that you'll see the parallels between doom scrolling and the sort of doom watching of cable and other mainstream news outlets. I would also argue that the news sources of what are being called alternative media are just as bad as the more mainstream versions of information dumping, albeit with a more open-ended and less obvious behavior and thought control agenda. More importantly, however, is that through this discussion, we all begin to recognize the urgent need to guard our minds from this form of overt programming that is being exerted upon us all of the time. We've already seen in studies on social media scrolling that fragmented attention drastically impairs our ability to encode and then retrieve memories. Research shows that multitasking with social media while learning new material significantly reduces short-term recall and produces self-reported memory failures. When you divide your attention across competing stimuli, your brain struggles to consolidate those impressions into long-term storage. Now imagine applying this same phenomenon to the 24-hour news cycle. Things like CNN, Fox, MSNBC, CBS, even things on YouTube like the various personalities that have been removed from those platforms like Tucker, Megyn Kelly, even Candace Owens, Joe Rogan, all of these major podcasters that have come to popularity in the last 5 to 10 years. We're not being given time to digest a single story or event before the new, shiny episode is being brought to us. Instead, the format of mainstream news bombards us with dozens of disconnected stories in a single sitting. Headlines, live updates, breaking news banners, pundit panels, emotional interviews, and dramatic visuals all stacked on top of each other. The form of this delivery, not just the content, is engineered to keep you watching and to keep your nervous system on high alert, to feed you rapid hits of novelty. In the same way, Infinite Scroll delivers endless, unpredictable content. Cable news and the offshoots in the new alternative spaces cycle the stories, update them every hour, and introduce new crises before the last one has even been close to resolved. In this news feed model, it fractures your attention in precisely the same way that TikTok or Instagram Reels does. Neurologically, novelty activates dopamine pathways. The brain craves the next hit of new information and quickly tires of the old. As a result, the stories themselves don't stick in your mind because your hippocampus, the structure in your brain that's responsible for encoding new memories, never gets the sustained attention and then repetition that it needs to consolidate them. Just as with doom scrolling, your attention becomes a resource that's harvested for profit. Ratings and ad revenue depend on your continued engagement, and so the medium has evolved to prioritize sensational novelty over meaningful comprehension. This is why, even after spending hours watching the news or engaging with podcasts, most people can't recall basic details of the stories that they consumed. Their minds have been fragmented into microbursts of stimulus and reaction. No matter what source you use to consume news and information about current events, the models are designed in such a way as to significantly hinder our ability to retain and then build on what we hear, see, or read in ways that would activate our deeper, more critical thinking capacities. This fractured environment has predictable consequences. Studies on social media show that when content is consumed rapidly and without reflection, working memory becomes overloaded, perspective memory, or the ability to remember to do things in the future, degrades, and emotional regulation suffers. Short-form video platforms like TikTok are particularly harmful to perspective memory. The 24-hour news cycle operates as a macro-scale version of this phenomenon. When you're fed breaking news every hour on the hour, your cognitive bandwidth is consumed not by thinking deeply, but by anticipating the next update. Just like scrolling for the next post, you're watching for the next crisis. In this state, you're not engaging with the content reflectively, you're reacting emotionally. And this is very fertile ground for appeal to emotion fallacies to take hold. News channels and the programmers of the narratives that are trafficked on them know this. They choose emotionally charged images, language, and sound bites to create fear, outrage, or tribal solidarity. Your higher reasoning takes a back seat to your limbic system's fight or flight responses. This also ties into what we've discussed regarding narcissistic supply. People increasingly turn to ideological camps or media outlets not for truth, but for validation, status, and emotional comfort. Just as materialism teaches us to objectify people as means to an end, the 24-hour news cycle conditions us to use information as a means of self-soothing or strengthening our tribal identity. We pick our team and consume only the content that reinforces our pre-existing biases, creating a closed loop where the news isn't actually a window into reality, but more like a mirror reflecting back our own emotional state. This cycle fuels dopamine addiction. The constant stream of novelty and outrage functions like intermittent reinforcement, a proven driver of compulsive behavior. You never know when the next shocking revelation or emotional payoff will come, so you keep watching, keep scrolling, keep finding new sources of outrage to fuel that desire. In doing so, you're teaching your brain to seek stimulation, not understanding. Here's where it becomes even more concerning. Just as social media platforms are designed to keep us scrolling, mainstream news networks and the corporate, political, and government interests that are behind them have learned to weaponize these predictable cognitive vulnerabilities. Think of the problem-reaction-solution framework that we have discussed at length. A problem is broadcast 24/7. Terror threats, pandemics, economic collapse, political turmoil, and scandal. This relentless coverage ensures the reaction is fear, confusion, exhaustion, or outrage among the public. In this state of emotional reactivity and fragmented attention, people's ability to critically evaluate proposed solutions is severely diminished. As a result, policies or initiatives that might have been rejected under calmer circumstances are now accepted as necessary and even welcomed. This is how large-scale controlling agendas can operate in plain sight. When your memory of events is shallow and disjointed, You can't track inconsistencies or patterns over time. Without focused effort and self-control, it becomes very easy to lose the ability to connect the dots or see into the underlying agendas and the controlling mechanisms that are operating on your cognitive processes. Every new crisis feels new and disconnected from the last. Without a coherent narrative, we wind up relying on the narratives that are being supplied to us. And that's the point. This is also where the manipulation of the Overton window comes into play. By bombarding the public with extreme or emotionally charged scenarios, media outlets can shift what seems acceptable or reasonable in public discourse. Just as in the classroom experiments of Thorndike or Skinner's operant conditioning, behaviors and beliefs are shaped gradually through reinforcement. The news cycle normalizes previously unthinkable ideas by introducing them incrementally amid a flurry of other stories. This is a process known as nudging and has proven to be extremely effective at shifting public opinion. Over time, the window of acceptable opinion moves, and the people who would have opposed a measure 5 years ago now demand it themselves, believing it to be their own organic conclusion about a situation rather than the result of a long, coercive conditioning process. We will discuss more on this in upcoming videos with regard to the rollout of digital ID and the looming control grid. In this way, the 24-hour news cycle doesn't just inform, it transforms. It erodes our cognitive defenses, rewires our reward systems, and conditions us to accept, even desire, our own loss of autonomy. People become willing participants in their own manipulation because the constant stimulation feels like engagement and empowerment, when in reality, it's numbing their capacity to think and then remember clearly what they have seen, read, or heard. The parallels between doom scrolling and what I'm calling doom watching are too strong to ignore. Both rely on novelty, emotional triggers, and intermittent reinforcement to keep us engaged. Both fracture our attention, impair memory formation, and weaken our capacity for critical thought. And both can be and are very often exploited by entities with agendas far larger than our own individual well-being. Guarding your mind against the 24-hour news cycles and the constant scrolling that we engage with in social media platforms and even YouTube, really the entire internet at this point, requires the same intentionality that we've discussed in relation to those other platforms. It means limiting our exposure, choosing depth over breadth, and taking time to reflect before reacting. It means cultivating memory practices, journaling events, discussing them offline with real people, comparing stories over time to build your own coherent narrative rather than outsourcing it to networks whose incentives are not aligned with your individual emotional and intellectual clarity. Most of all, it means recognizing that the constant stimulation of mainstream news is not neutral information delivery. It is a form of behavioral conditioning designed to shape your perceptions, your emotions, and ultimately your consent. There are great resources that help to reveal the inherent biases that exist within the narrative-driven news cycles of today, but they are only as good as our diligence with applying the tools that we have to think clearly about the things that we're engaging with. We are not powerless. By stepping back, focusing our attention, and retraining our brains to value truth over novelty, we can resist the pull of these manipulative cycles. So until next time, stay diligent, stay vigilant, and stay safe, keeping your minds on guard.